Before I say anything, I just want you to have a look at this footage. Is this not one of the ugliest games you've ever seen? This isn't a glitch, or modded, or unfinished in any way. Cruelty Squad is designed to be offensive to the senses. You've got this horrible fleshy overlay covering the UI, there are loads of grimacing faces built into the architecture, this gross thing is your boss slash best friend slash spiritual mentor, the enemies aren't just nasty looking but plain weird, and if you look very closely, you'll see that this entire house is made from nothing but Funko Pop boxes, and that is terrifying. The game's aesthetic is the worst bits of late 90s boomer shooters and GeoCities blended up and left to rot. And it's not just the visuals either. The entire soundtrack to Cruelty Squad is similarly off-putting. In short, Cruelty Squad kind of hates you. Everything from the game's menus, to its difficulty, and even to its mechanics are designed to feel hostile and unnatural. One of the most common enemies are these horrible little things called flesh rats, which are impossible to see or hit, cause a weird nausea effect when they hit you, and do crap loads of damage. Or how about this expensive piece of armor you might be tempted to save up for, that covers almost the entire screen in a horrible goop, thereby rendering it worthless. And that is just scratching the surface of some of the bullshit in this game. You might be forgiven at this stage for thinking that I really hated Cruelty Squad, but you'd actually be dead wrong. I think it is completely awesome. Somehow, out of a maelstrom of objectively terrible design decisions that fly in the face of everything we think we know about how games ought to be made, Cruelty Squad emerges from the filth not just as a functional experience, but one that feels totally different to play compared to other, similar shooters, because it's so alien and repulsive. But how could this possibly be the case? How can making games that feel unpleasant to play, are deliberately unfair, and just look like this actually be a good thing? Well, I think the key to understanding why a lot of games that defy what we think of as good or elegant design end up being really fun anyway, is to understand that a game's beauty and a game's quality are different things. See, in the context of art, something that's beautiful doesn't just look nice, it also feels nice. It's pleasing to the senses. For example, this lovely drawing of a bird. Ugly things, however, like my drawing of a bird, are the opposite. They're repulsive, they look and feel weird or unnatural, and as a result we have a negative response to them. But why is this? Well, our perception of beauty comes from whether a piece of art or an object follows certain internal rules that we associate with beauty. It's why this golden ratio appears all over the place in classically beautiful art, and it's why this series of chords is in like 75% of pop songs. Humans like it when their expectations of beauty are met, and it's when these rules are broken that things start to get, well, ugly. To show you what I mean, compare any one of the classic great platformers like Mario to Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It. The entire Mario series has made its name on having beautiful, elegant design, particularly when it comes to the controls. Each jump has just enough power to be expressive while still feeling weighty, every level is structured such that even a moderately skilled player can glide through them with ease, and even if you do screw up, players are given loads of fun tools like spins or wall jumps to help them recover in style. Mario is so beautifully designed that you basically can't make a platformer that feels good to play without copying his formula a little bit, because that's what players expect out of a beautiful platforming experience. Enter Getting Over It, which, in case you don't know, is all about climbing a big mountain with nothing but a hammer. Yep. In contrast to almost every other platformer ever, Getting Over It is designed in such a way that every action is difficult, unintuitive, and dangerous. For starters, just using the hammer is hard enough on its own, with it being difficult to get into the right place, it constantly launching you in unexpected directions, and failing to properly adhere to terrain that was not designed with hammer climbing in mind. If it was even designed at all. Bennett Foddy's Mountain isn't a beautiful playground to showcase fine-tuned mechanics, but a chaotic pile of trash that doesn't work with the player, but against them. Getting Over It is uncomfortable to play because it almost feels like the work of a bad designer that doesn't know what they're doing, but instead, it's actually a tightly controlled attempt to create something that deliberately defies all of those invisible rules of beautiful game design. Getting Over It has no smooth, empowering controls, no nice clean level design, and no safety nets. It's just you and a mountain of trash. In spite of the fact that it is deeply frustrating to play, Getting Over It manages to channel those negative emotions into this fantastic sense of resolve as you fight Diogenes and his dumb hammer all the way up to the summit, which is an emotional journey you just couldn't get out of a Nintendo game that was designed to be smooth and accommodating. This is what I think the key factor that that makes ugly games worth celebrating is, by breaking what we perceive to be foundational design rules, so-called ugly art can open up entirely new avenues of expression for designers and entirely new ways of playing games for us. Through this lens, we can see why games that go out of their way to gross you out or frustrate you can still be enjoyable in spite of this. The Binding of Isaac is pretty nasty looking to say the least, but in order for it to convey an honestly pretty good story of coming to terms with abuse, the idea that the human body is inherently corrupt, and the dangers of evangelical faith, it needs to unsettle and gross out the player to put them in Isaac's shoes. Similarly, Resident Evil's legendarily clunky and stiff controls that make moving away from zombies a real hassle may have originally been the consequence of PlayStation 1 hardware, but that weird quirk is still around because a frustrating lack of control amplifies a fear factor that simply wouldn't exist if you had smoother, more expressive traversal mechanics. Just look at Resident Evil 6. It's the fastest paced and most flexible game in the series, and also by far the least scary for exactly that reason. Ugly, hostile design can even be taken a step further towards breaking the very foundation of how we think video games ought to work, such as in the case of games that outright don't want you to finish them. See, when we play games, we enter into a sort of unspoken contract with them that every challenge we face is going to be fair and ultimately beatable, even if they put up a fight, and as a result, we go into most games expecting to be able to do and see everything eventually. So, when a game comes along that secretly breaks this contract, and is perfectly fine with creating incredibly difficult challenges designed to be almost impossible to beat, or even entirely unwinnable, it can be a huge blow to the player's ego because it feels like the game is being unfair, even though all that's really happened is the game has taken off the training wheels for the first time ever. Oftentimes, poorly made, actually bad ugly games do this completely by accident. It feels bad to lose in a game normally, but when that loss comes from needing information you couldn't possibly have access to, or the game working inconsistently, it feels so much worse. Sonic 06, to use an uncontroversial example, isn't particularly difficult even at its worst, but the way the game's horrible, glitchy physics and confusing level design seems to actively work against you shatters this invisible fairness pact and makes it way more frustrating to play than games actually designed to be challenging. However, deliberately ugly games can use inconsistent and unfair difficulty to instantly put the player on the back foot and encourage them to see enemies as a genuine threat rather than as an arbitrary challenge from a game that secretly wants you to win. If you've played a From Software game, for example, you're no doubt familiar with their classic trope of putting you up against the boss that's way too hard very early on that will almost certainly make you look like a total chump. Demon's Souls has this big baddie, Dark Souls 1 has the Asylum Demon, Bloodborne has this starter werewolf, and Sekiro has a fake Ganishiro boss fight which will absolutely destroy you. A game going out of its way to demotivate and disempower the player by throwing them into a hostile, complicated world without really giving them much of a chance to fight back seems like bad design. But because From Software are experts at making the most out of a game's idiosyncrasies and rough edges, they managed to turn the experience of humiliating failure into a way to establish the all-important lesson that the best way to learn is to get your teeth kicked in by a big scary boss monster. While From Software are definitely one of the biggest developers of ugly games that don't want the player to win, they're far from the only successful studio known for doing this. Icepick Lodge, creators of the Pathologic series, as well as some other deeply ugly but fantastic games, use fiddly UI, relentless difficulty, and systems that are so poorly explained that you could make the argument they're actively trying to mislead the player to crush the hope out of them completely. Oh, and did I mention that in Pathologic specifically, the game gets harder, not easier whenever you die, because they're really going for the whole Eastern European bleakness thing. Playing a Pathologic game is an exercise in deliberate misery, but it's also one of the most immersive and grippingly strange gaming experiences out there. If the world wasn't so bleak and the mechanics weren't so horribly opaque, then the game would simply be boring. But by reveling in the objectively unfair, not fun gameplay, players get to make choices that feel truly meaningful, and eventually find hope of curing the plague where there was none before. But that's obviously not to say that all ugly games are bummers designed to make you feel bad. A game having messy, unfocused, or just plain broken mechanics can also be a bunch of fun. For example, there's Skyrim and its legendary buckets of thievery. In essence, because Skyrim is really well made, putting a bucket on an NPC's head blocks their line of sight completely, meaning that they are completely unable to stop you from robbing them blind. Pun intended. This completely unbalances the already shaky in-game economy, is obviously an unintended use of the stealth mechanics, and shatters the game's sense of immersion. So, why is it still in the game after 10 years of re-releases and bug fixes? Well, because despite the fact that it's a rough edge in the game's design, the bucket trick is incredibly funny and really only serves to benefit the experience of playing the game. It's very easy to criticize games for being poorly made or ugly because of glitches or unfinished content, but just as in the case of ugly graphics, systems, or controls, this is a very narrow-minded view. Not only is it basically impossible to make a bug-free game, but leaving in software quirks that improve the experience has benefited a whole host of games, to the point that an entire genre has sprung up around this exact concept. The likes of Goat Simulator, Surgeon Sim, and Octodad are a bunch of fun, in large part due to the fact that they don't really work right a lot of the time. The physics systems are constantly bugging out, characters flail and wobble all over the place, and oftentimes simply trying to play the game ends up in things going horribly wrong in a hilarious way that wouldn't be possible if they worked perfectly. What this weird genre of slightly janky sandbox games are is a masterclass in carefully cultivating a game's most entertaining glitches, but pruning away the many other bugs that will make the experience less fun. But beyond even that, by choosing not to fix a game's imperfections, they can actually become much stronger as a result. Combos in fighting games legendarily stem from a bug with how move inputs were registered in Street Fighter 2. To quote-unquote fix this piece of unintentional design would have actually ruined a genre that's since made combos, animation cancelling, and all sorts of initially glitchy behaviours into a core part of its identity. Speedrunning games can even turn finding and exploiting bugs into an art form all of its own, as players perform frame-perfect glitches and skips to shave off precious seconds from their time, developing an intimate familiarity with games because of the hidden complexity created by their imperfect coding. This, I think, is the danger of prioritizing beauty and rigid stylistic rules when it comes to the way we perceive games. It's fine, and to be honest unavoidable, to have some sort of internal idea of video gaming beauty in your head, but to push all games into conforming to it will rob us of a load of fantastic games. Not only that, in only seeking to play the best of the best universally acclaimed video games out there, you're actually getting a very shallow experience of what the art form has to offer. Some of my favourite gaming experiences ever have come from titles that aren't just rough around the edges, but are objectively flawed. Deadly Premonition might have awful writing, acting, gameplay, balance, graphics, and basically everything else, but it remains fantastically spooky and a kind of weird Japanese, even more confusing homage to Twin Peaks that I just couldn't put down. It Takes Two, a co-op game with some horribly out-of-place moments and an overall pretty rubbish story, should have been cringeworthy, but a friend playing as my horrible wife and I had a great time mercilessly mocking the game as well as this creepy talking book all the way through. And Earth Defense Force looks like it came right out of a 10-year-old's first attempt at making a game, and it is exactly as simple and stupid as you'd expect, but it's also an incredibly bombastic, insect-annihilating good time. None of these ugly games are going to make it into a game design handbook, or a GDC talk, or a best games ever list. Alright, maybe It Takes Two is going to be in a few, but that doesn't mean that they're without value, or that bringing them more in line with our perception of a beautiful game would improve them. Cruelty Squad, for example, needs borderline unfair enemies like these essentially unkillable golems to force you to abandon your preconceptions and explore alternate routes or think of cool possibilities with your upgrades like the intestine grappling hook, which, yes, exists and it's just as cool as it sounds. Its repulsive, kitsch, fascist aesthetic fantastically communicates the sheer depravity that Cruelty Squad's culture has sunk to in a way that 4K photorealism never could. And the fact that the easiest way to make money is the time-consuming and convoluted process of brutalizing enemy corpses, harvesting their organs, and selling them on a virtual stock market fantastically brainwashes you into a capitalist ubermensch, seeing life as expendable and civilians as walking sacks of meat filled with valuable spines and brains that you need to afford your next body-warping upgrade. Ugly games aren't secretly profound or beautiful, and in the vast majority of cases, they're less fun than their beautiful alternatives. But by breaking down and rebuilding our preconceptions, ugly games offer a glimpse into parallel universes of game design and can teach us entirely new ways to enjoy ourselves. In fact, many games that could rightfully be called ugly were so successful that they popularized an entirely new way of playing games and became beautiful. Demon's Souls made anti-player design palatable to the masses, Rogue and Dwarf Fortress made losing and starting over again fun, and even Minecraft's chunky, low-res graphics have now become a celebrated art style in their own right. But then again, sometimes ugly games are designed by psychopaths who bind reload to flicking the mouse up and down instead of R, and let me tell you, that is a bridge too far. I didn't get slightly interested in video games for a couple of years to be treated like this. I mean, is nothing sacred to you people? Hello! Welcome, come on in. This is the After the Video bit where I talk about some cool things and thank my lovely patrons. The cool internet thing I think you ought to check out, in the spirit of this video's topic, is the Shorter Games with Worse Graphics bundle, which is running for the next few weeks, and it contains a lot of weirder, smaller games by independent devs, and who knows, you might find something interesting in there. A personal favourite of these games for me is I Get This Call Every Day, which is a decidedly ugly game all about working in a call centre. It's 5 minutes long and it is great. But not as great as my wonderful patrons. If you'd like to support the channel, just $1 for 1 month on Patreon is worth more than thousands and thousands of views on YouTube. So as far as I'm concerned, if you give me some cash, you can ad block my videos to your heart's content. And if you're generous enough to give me even more money than that, you'll even get bonus stuff like behind the scenes director's cuts, update videos, and your name in the credits, like these $10 mysterious benefactors, who are Alex Vieira, Andrew Lebrano, Asaran, Ausakav, Bjorn Kala, Brennan Spalling, Brian Natariani, Konstantina Punkt, Cosmix360, Daniel Medjes, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, Diglatia, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Evie, Gazkul, Gretar Hannison, Jacob Dylan Riddle, James Andrew Adams, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, George Aria Navarro, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Mace54, Max Filipov, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Phoenix Thurikaz, Philby the Bilby, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Wolf414, Zach Grendel, and ciao. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you around. Bye bye!